week is Eating Disorders Awareness Week. Right now, at least 1 in 50 people are currently living with one in the UK, but the real number could be higher than that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we often hear about is how they can impact the lives of children and teenagers. But today, presenter Poppy J finds out how adults can be affected too.
It's believed that more than 1.25 million people in the UK have an eating disorder. This includes those living with anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorders. There's a common misconception that it's something that only affects young people. The truth, however, is that eating disorders can affect anyone of any age. And there are fears its perception as a young person's problem could be preventing adults from seeking help. It's a situation Rachel, who's now 50 and in recovery from bulimia and anorexia, knows well.
No one at our age wants to go to the doctors and go, by the way, I'm having issues with food, I've lost some weight. Sounds really selfish and sounds really vain.
If we go back to the beginning, how did this start for you?
It was after the birth of my first child. So I was 23, 24, and I just had a week-old baby, and someone made a comment that, oh, you still look pregnant. Something just snapped in my head. The more you lose weight, the more you restrict, the more you're in control. Without you even realising it, completely takes over.
Changes in young people's eating and behaviour are often noticeable to their families. As an adult, Rachel's illness was less obvious to those around her, but just as destructive.
You end up kind of isolating yourself from everybody and everything. You pull yourself out of sort of social situations. You make excuses for not doing things like the children. Like I wouldn't take them swimming, didn't want to eat in front of people. I didn't even eat with my children. I've wasted so many years. My husband didn't trust me, my children didn't trust me because they knew I would lie to them because I was so secretive. But I do know it's an illness and it wasn't done on purpose.
And when did you realise, Rachel, that you perhaps needed to get some help?
It was a moment that my husband brought up. This had been going on for a good 7 years by then, 7 or 8 years.
Had you hidden it from him for 7 years?
100%, yeah. I was cross because I was like in denial, and he had to be quite blunt with me at times and say, like, we can't carry on like this.
It was the first of many conversations about Rachel's illness. The right care wasn't available where she lived at the time, in Germany. And when the family came home, the cycle continued for years.
I sought help later on in my 40s. It took that many years to get to a point to go, enough is enough. I discussed it with my husband again. He said to me, if you don't get help, I will not be around. I've got to go. He could see me potentially killing myself. And I wasn't the person he'd married.
Rachel found the wait for the right treatment on the NHS frustrating, and there were concerns she was getting worse.
You're waiting for months up to a year. It could be such a long time, and by which time your weight is plummeting or your family is in crisis. And I remember thinking, I'm not worthy of treatment because there are people that are much younger than me that have got their life to live. I ended up having to go private, and I was really lucky that I was able to pay for that help.
As well as private treatment and cognitive behavioural therapy from the NHS, Rachel drew on the support of an eating disorder charity. Group sessions showed her and her family that they weren't alone. Were you surprised when you went to these groups?
Absolutely. Men, women, men of my age. I was absolutely shocked because I actually thought, oh my gosh, I'm not that abnormal. When you're having bad days or bad weeks, you can still contact them and the help is there. They are absolute angels and they saved my life.
The charity that helped Rachel with her recovery is SEED. Actor Gemma Oten is the CEO of the charity, which was set up by her parents as a result of Gemma's own battle with an eating disorder. What is going through your mind?
It is like every single day you're in a prison, and my dad often says he didn't know whether his daughter was going to get parole, a life sentence, or whether it was going to be a death sentence, and that is what an eating disorder does. And it is why it's one of the biggest mental health killers.
Gemma's illness took hold when she was 10, and she lived with various forms of it until she recovered in her early 20s. 15 years on, staying well is something she still has to prioritise.
It's a recovery after recovery. I think it's just important that I keep having therapy. I've got my toolkit in my head. If I ever have a day where I'm struggling, I always sort of acknowledge the eating disorder. I know you're there, mate, but you're staying there.
As part of her work, Gemma sees the challenges that adults with eating disorders can experience.
They're seen as being too old to be making a difference, so there's no point in giving them therapy or thinking that they're ever going to recover because they're too old. Everybody has a chance to recovery.
Tom Quinn is from the Beat Eating Disorders charity. Surprisingly, he says that data on adults with eating disorders isn't collected, but his charity sees plenty of them.
There are a huge number of older adults that are needing our support.
So do you think some adult patients are actually slipping through the net?
Absolutely. We know that it is much harder for adults to get treatment. There's less treatment available than for young people.
Many men and women like Rachel can develop an eating disorder for the first time in adulthood. Big life events are often a trigger.
Are there any points in an adult's life where they could be affected by an eating disorder?
We know that there's a strong genetic element, but life events can be really impactful. Family breakdown, divorce, death of parents. We also know that for women, the menopause can be a factor.
If you think you have an eating disorder, Tom says it's important to see your GP.
Treatment is patchy across the country, but approach your GP and ask for a referral for eating disorder treatment. Focus on the mental distress that your eating is causing, on the effect it's having. Make sure that the GP doesn't focus too much on your weight, because actually eating disorders can affect people of any weight.
And what would you advise to someone who has a relative or a friend who has an eating disorder?
Don't go straight in sort of talking about their eating. Really focus on how they're doing. Because these are mental illnesses, they're a coping mechanism for mental distress. Ask them how they're doing and hopefully gradually bring them to the point where you are encouraging them to get help.
For those living with an eating disorder, it can be hard to imagine a life without it, particularly if it's something they've suffered with for many years. But help and support is out there for anyone of any age. You're not alone, and you can get better.
Big thank you to Rachel for sharing her story there. And I thought actually she was speaking on behalf of so many people. She used the word, she said she felt selfish and a bit vain because she didn't want to get help in the first place. But as we've heard, there is help out there, so seek it if you need it.
Yeah,
sure.
thanks Rachel for sharing your story, because I know a lot of people will feel that they know your story really, really well.